welcome back to Rue's Life. So here I am yet again in the Polytunnel. It's the 28th, I think, of April, and it's a little bit chilly today. It's quite warm in here, but it is quite cold outside. We have had a little sprinkling of rain, which is much needed. Everywhere's just so dry, and we really could do with some more. But what I'd like to talk about today is something that I think about quite a lot, and I'm sure many of you do, and that's when we have a garden or a plot or an allotment, can we make it pretty, practical, or productive? Do we actually have to make a choice? Can we have all three? For me, I think the main factor in that would be time. How much time are we actually able to spend in our gardens, at our allotments, on our plots? And I think that is the absolute main factor. I think other factors to take into account are, what type of person are you? Some people are quite happy to kind of muddle along. Personally, I'm quite a neat and tidy person, but there are factors where I do sometimes have to kind of put that to one side. So obviously this is just my opinion, it's certainly not a right or wrong answer. I just thought it was something really interesting to think about. And for anybody that's maybe taken on a new plot, or for those of you that might be struggling, I just thought it was an interesting topic to discuss. So for me, my polytunnel, as you know, is somewhere that I can keep very neat and tidy. I try to keep it pretty, it is practical, and it's also productive. So this unit, I do manage to have all three. However, when I get outside to the beds, things start to change. Now obviously, if you had a plot of growing space that is already very productive and very established, it's much easier to keep on top of that. It's much more difficult establishing something from scratch. And I think also another thing we do have to take into account is money. If money were no object, it is much easier to be able to get equipment and materials that we can use to make pathways and edging and all that kind of thing. Now there are some YouTubers that I follow who have particularly immaculate plots, and a really good example for those of you that follow Vivi Gregory, her growing space is pretty, practical and productive, but she herself will admit that that is what she does. She does it through necessity. She's given up her job, she lives without a wage, and she grows in order to feed herself. And because of that, she spends a huge amount of time at her allotment, and she's able to spend all day, every day there if she chooses to do that. And most of us don't have that. I'm cautious to use the term luxury because I'm fully aware that Vivi works tremendously hard, and essentially her allotment has become her job, but I think you know what I mean. And I think other factors to take into account, for me personally, I do suffer with some chronic health conditions, so there will always be days where I am limited on what I'm able to do. So for example, I do suffer with chronic migraine, and if I'm having a bad day, then I can do nothing. So if I've got a few hours that I'm able to use, well, I'll probably be using those to be sowing and growing and planting on, and not necessarily doing things like weeding and tidying and maintenance. So I do try very hard to maintain and keep on top of everything, but a combination of my chronic conditions, and one of them is actually my back, I'm not always physically or mentally able to pack in as much as I would like to. So therefore the productivity has to come first. At the end of the day, we're all growing in order that we can produce harvests. So it's no point having something that looks absolutely perfect with beautiful borders and completely weed-free paths and weed-free beds if we haven't actually got anything growing in them. So what I thought I'd do is we'll have a little pootle around, and I'll just kind of talk you through what I do and why. And I'd be really interested to know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Do any of you have any tips and hints for sort of shortcuts? What are the things that you do to help yourself with any of these situations? So, are you limited on time? Are funds your issue? Is it a health issue? Is it a different issue altogether? Or are you one of those people that has actually found the art of mastering all three? And if so, how do you achieve that? So let's have a little wander around, and I'll just talk you through my thoughts of, where I'm at, what I'm doing, why I do it, how I think I could improve it, what I could do in an ideal situation, things that I'm really happy with, things that I'm less happy with, and, if anybody's got any suggestions of how you think I can make improvements, they would be gratefully received. I think that's one of the great things about this YouTube, is that, we can all look into each other's sort of gardens, we can share hints and tips and really help each other out. So I'm going to flip that camera around and we'll start in the polytunnel and then we'll pop outside. So I do often get comments on, how neat and tidy my polytunnel is, and I do take great pride in keeping it nice. I'm just going to tip the camera down a little. And one of the things that I've found absolutely pivotal in being able to keep the polytunnel the way that I do is the weed suppressant membrane flooring. It was an optional extra when we bought the poly, but I am so glad that we did. It's really good quality, it's very thick, it's been down as long as the polytunnel, and I think we're into our 4th growing year now with this tunnel, and not a single weed has ever come through it. So I'll just again move the camera a little. You can see we've tucked it right the way down, all the way around the edges. The whole floor is covered. It lets the water permeate through, but the weeds don't come up. And we actually did lay this down directly onto grass, and as you can see, it's absolutely brilliant. I did consider putting down some pea gravel, and to be honest with you, it was funds originally that stopped me doing it, but I'm really glad that I didn't, because I think it would have been hard to maintain. As it is, I can just have a good old sweep out with a broom at the end of each session that I'm here, or the end of each day. Had I put gravel down, obviously I would have had to have kept that raked and tidy, and I also think that, it probably would have got weeds coming through it where I spilt compost seeds and so on, and weed seeds would have inevitably worked their way in. So it's something that almost happened by accident, but I'm really glad that I've stuck with just the membrane floor. So I do try very much. Let's just pan around. The top bench is pretty much at the moment designated to seedlings. The far right hand corner, I do keep a little dustpan and brush, my radio, some pots and some other bits and pieces. And then you can see here I've got sort of equipment, canes, tools, and then this does become a little bit of a junk corner over here. Let me just move away from the hanging basket, but I do keep it fairly tidy, and eventually there will be pots growing there, so that will have to move. And then underneath, I've got some boxes and tubs. There is actually a lidded tub at the back here with the box on top, and then this little tub here is the sort of things that I use all the time. So I've got my knee pads, gloves, trowels, sort of hand tools, bits and pieces in there, and I always put them back when I've finished. I give them a clean and pop them back. I've got my soil sieves there, there's some pots and bits and pieces. I always keep an open bag of compost just here, it's why I always keep it, so I always know where to go for it. Behind that, those are actually the battens, the bubble wrap, the screws, etc., that I use to seal up the door, which I'll just swivel you round. That door during the autumn and very cold winter months. Then I've got some pots here and my trugs, and you can also see there's some watering cans, and I do try very much to always keep those things in the same place, and that just means that when I need something I know where it is, and I always try and put it back at the end of the day. The beds were constructed, as you can see, they've been made with some tongue and groove wood, And this side of the polytunnel, the beds were constructed using some old scaffolding boards that happened to be here on the farm when we moved here. And I really like this system of having these set beds, and then you can just see there's a tub there, and then in this corner, if I come back, this is where I have a good amount of space. You can see from where the trucks are at the moment and the chair, they get moved, and then I put a lot of tubs and pots which I grow tomatoes, beans, cucumber and whatever else I want to put in this corner, sort of things that I tend to move around more. So I quite like the fact that I've got this area that I can put pots in, but I've got the fixed beds as well. So this is to me, a really easy area to keep clean, tidy and organised. I do pretty much feel I've nailed it in here with pretty, practical and productive. So let's go outside. So I think there's an aeroplane flying around overhead, so I do apologise for the noise. I've been sort of waiting, but he seems to be kind of flying around. I don't think he's passing over, so we'll carry on, and I hope it's not too disruptive. So just at a first glance, you know, the beds are fairly productive, it looks quite nice, and overall I'm really pleased with this. I'll just tip the camera down and you can see the blue tarpaulin here. This is a bed that I'm creating at the moment, and this is what I would call a classic example for me of what is practical and productive, but it isn't particularly pretty. But I'm prepared to put up with it because it's not messy, it's just a little bit of an eyesore. But I know that it will be worth it because it is fairly short term. So I'm suppressing the weeds down, and then once it's been there for long enough, I will pull it up, and as with other beds you will have seen me create, I then lay down some cardboard and then put some form of growing medium on top, and then I have a bed. So let's have a closer look at these other beds. So we'll start with this pathway here. So you can see I really do need to put some more bark down, and again at the moment that is fund dependent, but this has been really good. I've put the weed suppressant membrane down. It was tucked down here next to the polytunnel. Now I used to have massive weed problem here, and this originally was all grass. So I've put the weed suppressant membrane down, and as I say, tucked it in right down next to the polytunnel and filled that up with bark and put bark chips on the path, and it's just brilliant. I used to have to strim all of this area, and there were so many problems with that. You know, I worried about strimming up to the polytunnel in case I damaged it. The debris from the strimming used to flick all over the beds, and I know that, you know, grass cuttings are a good mulch, but it started to look really untidy, and as soon as the grass started to get long, it really wasn't very nice at all. So this particular section I have recently been weeding, and even though it needs a top up, it still looks pretty good. The beds themselves are not looking too bad, but there are a few weeds coming through. I do try and keep on top of the weeding, but so long as my plants are looking healthy, I don't worry too much about a few weeds. But one of the things that I do in my veg bed is I actually interplant amongst my vegetables in any gaps with flowers like Californian poppy, calendula, that kind of thing. And they do self-seed as well. Now this year they haven't self-seeded because I gave the bed such an overhaul at the end of last growing season, and over the winter I did put a good layer of cardboard and mulches onto those beds, so any of the seeds that were there haven't actually had the chance to germinate or grow. So I've just popped some more Californian poppies in to the area just over there between where my peas and my beans are going to be, and you know, over the next couple of seasons I will just be top dressing these with compost, and what I find is that those flowers just come back year in year out, and they look beautiful. So they look pretty, and they also fill the gaps and help to keep on top of those weeds. So let's move around again. So as you can see, this pathway is not looking too bad at all, but once I get around the corner, you can see I've actually weeded up to about this level, and then you can see where the grass is really taking over. So let's get closer to that. So you can see, you know, I just haven't kept on top of this. The weeds are coming up, the grass is growing. Some of that is because I started this plot from scratch in what essentially was a sheep paddock. So, you know, it was a really fertile paddock for the sheep to graze. Prior to us being here, this was solely a sheep farm, and you know, it's such well established grassland that it's quite hard to stop it keep coming up. Now my pathways worked really effectively, but I didn't top them up. So where originally I would just get the odd little weed or bit of grass coming up and I would just pull it out because it was so small and weak, I have let this establish itself a little bit. But it doesn't take too long. So this section here that you can see, if you just keep that in mind, and I'll just carefully, without trying to make you too dizzy, turn you around, and this area here was exactly the same, and I just spent a couple of hours with the radio on weeding that, and look how much better it looks. So I know it won't take too long to get it back to that point. So let's just spin around again so you've got a slightly nicer view of the vegetables. So, you know, but as I've explained, you know, if I've only got a couple of hours or I'm not feeling brilliant, well, if I've got a choice of, you know, getting something into the ground or sowing some seeds or potting on, I'm going to choose that over being on my hands and knees and weeding these pathways. So what I need to do is establish them better and get more of the bark down, and that will help me with that problem. What I found, although they're quite narrow, my little pathways here in between are just, again, old scaffold boards, and you know, obviously they're completely weed free, and they're just enough for me to get up and down in between those beds, and that's a really, you know, great way of having a path that doesn't need any maintenance. So let's just move back. So again, things that I really like and people have commented on are my rustic bed edges. So if I just tip the camera down, you can see essentially I've just used these logs which were already lying around the farm. Some could consider them quite untidy. They're certainly not uniform, and I think it really is a matter of opinion as to whether, you know, they're untidy or whether they are indeed pretty. Personally, I really like them. I don't particularly like seeing the exposed membrane at the moment, but that is something that will, you know, be changed quite quickly just by topping up that bark. But I'd rather see a little bit of membrane poking through than a whole load of weeds. So for myself, on my personal sort of scoring, if you like, I think I'm managing maybe a 7 or 8 in the sort of managing all three aspects. There is a lot I could do, and there's certainly room for improvement, but I don't think I'm doing too badly. So let's hop back into the polytunnel. So as I say, overall, I'm absolutely thrilled to bits with the way I manage the polytunnel. You know, I think I've got all aspects covered. Outside, not so much, but not bad. So I hope you found this informative and interesting rather than just a bit of a ramble. And I hope you found it quite thought-provoking, because sometimes what we need to do is kind of stop and have a look at the whole picture. So if, you know, if you've got a particular bed or a particular area that's really getting you down, you know, try and take a look at the whole picture as to how you are managing and coping. You know, don't beat yourself up too much. If you're growing and you're producing and you're getting harvests, then you know you're getting it right. And you know, I think sometimes for me personally, it's not getting too hung up on, you know, just how pretty it looks. Now I know I'm very lucky because I'm here on the farm with my plot, but I was on an allotment some years ago, and obviously there are some sort of stipulations and regulations that can sort of weigh down on you, and you can get a little bit hung up on, you know, you must have X amount of your plot that's productive, and you can't have it. So for example, if you're struggling a bit and you just want to cover some over and just concentrate on one bed, well, I can do that here, but I know that, you know, there are some allotments where you have to have, for example, 80% actually productive and not dormant or covered. So that can have an influencing factor as well. And also, you know, I did find sometimes when I was on the allotment, it's very easy to start kind of looking at other people's allotments and plots. And whilst that can actually be really inspirational, it can also be a little bit depressing, because, you know, you look at somebody else's immaculate plot, and then you look back at your own and think, oh gosh, I'm not coping very well. Or you may be one of those immaculate plot holders, and you can sort of, you know, flounce off at the end of the day feeling quite smug about the fact that everybody else is full of weeds, or looking a mess, and yours looks wonderful. I also know that there is a little bit of that, you know, keeping on top of weeds to ensure that those weed seeds are not blowing over into your plot neighbours. So there's a bit of courtesy involved there as well. Worst case scenario for me here, if I decide to let a bed just turn back to grass, or there's dandelions blowing around, it really doesn't matter. So as I say, it's all food for thought, isn't it? So I'd really love to hear from you in the comments below. As I said earlier, what are your sort of hints and tips? Are you a weeder? Are you not so much of a weeder? Do you kind of accept that you'll always have a few weeds, or are you one of these people that has to have no weeds at all? And if that's the case, how do you manage and maintain that? What sort of companion planting do you find works really well? And also, what kind of growing mediums do you use? So, you know, are you a dig person that digs? Do you find that you do get more weeds that way? Are you a no dig? How do you go about your no dig? Are you a raised bed person? One of the things that I do find, and you will see that I use an awful lot of well-rotted horse manure from our muck heap, because we've got the horses. But the downside to that is that there are often a lot of weed seeds in horse manure, even when it's well rotted. Horses, if you don't know, they have a digestive system that actually, things like nettle seeds and thistle seeds can actually work their way from mouth all the way, you know, to being pooped back out, and those seeds are still there. They don't actually break them down like a cow or a sheep would. So I just accept that there will be some weed seeds, and I just pick them out. But I'm not going to spend, you know, what essentially would be hundreds of pounds on buying in compost when I've got a great big muck heap sitting there. So, you know, I can weigh it up. I can pay more money and have essentially weed-free compost, or should be weed-free compost. I know we can't always guarantee it. Or I can use the well-rotted horse manure, which I know may have a few weed seeds in, but it's in abundance. It's not costing me anything. So I think I've rattled on for long enough. I think I've pretty much touched on everything I wanted to. As I say, it was just something I started to think about the other day, and I thought it'd be a really interesting topic of conversation. It's perhaps something, I haven't actually done any live chats yet, and it's something I'm thinking about doing, and maybe it'd be a really interesting topic for us to discuss. So if that's something that you think you'd be interested in, again, pop me a comment below, and I'll see what I can do. So I hope you're all well. I hope you've all got a mass of seedlings going wherever you start your seedlings off, whether that's in the house, polytunnel, outside, greenhouse, wherever it is you're bringing on your little seedlings. I'd like to think lots of you have started to get things in the ground now. I've started getting things out, and I will be showing you that in one of my future videos. As ever, thank you ever so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you all again soon.